I'll
Yeah, yeah.
comment on it. I'll ask questions about it. Okay, perfect. All right, so all right, guys, this is Shawnee Bitcoins and David Lancashire from Saito, and we just want to talk about Saito and why it's different from other blockchains and Bitcoin, and why it's a revolutionary new technology. So,
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on the show.
No
I'm
problem.
really delighted, actually. Shawnee, we've been talking on Twitter sometimes. The stuff you're hearing are cats attacking things.
No problem.
But yeah, I'm really delighted to be here because, Shawnee and I were talking and, you've been asking questions about the economics, which a lot of people don't delve into. So yeah, delighted. Let's deep dive on this stuff.
For sure. First thing I want to say is I've been watching like a lot of podcasts throughout my life. I've watched a lot of people speak, like different types of people, like Rastas and gurus, and I like listening to people speak. And when I heard a lot of your talks, I was like, wow, this guy, not only in technology is he smart, but he also thinks like outside the box in terms of like rational
Mm.
thinking, and I think it's like really important for the space. Maybe you could accelerate the space super much faster than other people could because you're thinking, on a rational level, and that's important.
I think we definitely, Richard and I both come at this from a slightly different perspective. Like we work in tech. My background is economics, and, like tech as well, and political science and stuff. Richard's philosophy and mathematics. And, we kind of got into crypto from there. So I can kind of see how it connects with what I'm doing. But yeah, I think it does give us a much different perspective than like distributed systems people. Because,
Right.
when you understand Saito, you can see distributed systems people, it's kind of like they look at blockchain and they see what Leslie Lamport was doing in the 1980s. And they're like, oh, he's made some minor adjustments. And they miss out on a lot of the really significant economic changes that, Satoshi Nakamoto introduced. Like the idea
Right.
that, hey, if the network can pay for itself, and if the network can induce people to behave rationally, then, you've got something that can survive on its own without an owner. Totally
And
different view than comp sci,
if I had to ask you, what was the thing that really made you so passionate about this? Like, what was the one thing that you said, oh man, there's something here where I could actually like have an edge on other people, or I could, I see something that other people don't. When did you realize that? Or
I wouldn't, I wouldn't say it's an edge. I'd say that, Richard and I, we got lucky enough to get involved, 2012, 2013, and Bitcoin's the only game in town. And this was China. And one of the exciting things about China is like, we can see that the current financial system's just not doing it. Because, if someone in the States wants to buy something from our friends, like I got a friend who runs a factory that makes fences and stuff, and they can't sell directly to people because the Bank of China is sitting in the middle collecting massive amounts of tax. So like, it's a practical problem if you're outside the States, and it's a practical problem. I'm getting internet connection unstable. Are you doing okay?
yeah, no, we're good. You just skipped
Okay.
for 1 second, but now you're back. You
Okay.
said your friend something and then you skipped.
Yeah, I was just saying, like it's a practical problem. And I think people get into Bitcoin for all of these reasons. And then it's like a rabbit hole that you just dive down and it gets deeper and deeper, Like at the
Right.
beginning, I'll tell you, Bitcoin people complain about inflation and there's a bunch of like gold bug mentality there. And one of the things you got to say is those guys have been right about things that I didn't take seriously 10 years ago. Right? Like, inflation hits 10% a month. That's not supposed to happen with kind of a rational bureaucratic system managing monetary policy.
Right. Yeah, that's where I really got interested in kind of like the economics and stuff when I started to really look into this economist named Simon Dixon. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard of him.
Yeah. I
You have?
watched the video. I think you might have actually recommended it.
Oh yeah. He's like he was big on Celsius for a while, but he wasn't only talking about Celsius. He was, he has Bank to the Future, which is the first Bitcoin bank. I don't know if you ever know about that, but
Hmm.
yeah, he owns the first Bitcoin bank, and he was just really smart telling people like he predicted a lot of the financial crashes that were coming and
Yeah.
stuff. So I was really interested in like Bitcoin as a hedge for, some catastrophe that could come, or it would go up in those times. And I noticed that when I was in Ecuador, living in the place that I'm actually buying now, or
Mm.
near there, like 2 minutes from there. And I noticed, I said, the price is drastic. Like it doesn't make sense that it's only $5,000 if it's going to be helping people in all these situations. Like
Mhm.
when the shit hits the fan. And next thing you know, like right when I said that, next couple of days, it went from 5 to I don't even remember, 15 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit. So that's when I got interested in more in the economics and like gold parts of it.
I
So
think
it's
it's
interesting.
like there's something to the concept of the zeitgeist, like there's something there. And you start paying attention, you're like, no, actually, this is important. And it's
Right.
hard sometimes to put your thumb on it because it exists in this, it's something that's outside of what you totally understand, but
Right.
you can kind of feel it. And I think we're drawn to things that are interesting. So,
Mhm.
that's what got Richard and I into crypto. And I think it's this different starting point for different people. When it comes to Saito, I'd say once we had the solution, it actually became a problem, because what do you do with something that fixes fundamental problems? Like, do you have a responsibility to do it? And I think we do, right? Like,
Right.
if we were in a different space, you'd write a paper, you'd publish it, and then you'd sit back and you'd be like, okay, well, cite me, people, or you'd be playing a different game. For us,
Yeah.
we're well aware that it's difficult to understand, and if we don't build it and we don't help people understand, it's not going to happen, or it
Could you
gets significantly delayed.
could you compare what you're trying to do to anything that's ever happened in history? Like you're trying to fix this network that could become a future currency, that a universal currency that people could use to speed up payments, and also, a safer way to pay people, right? So has there ever been something in history, because like this tech stuff is so new, crypto.
Bitcoin, I'd say, like, we're basically, I got to plug in one sec. I'd say
Okay,
we're basically
okay. Take your time.
things that you should do before you get on the phone with people,
It's happened to me, believe me.
Yeah. Nobody signed on to watch Dave plug in his laptop. Yeah, I'd say Bitcoin's the obvious predecessor if you're looking for precedence, right? It comes into a space and it solves a problem that before Bitcoin came out, people didn't think it was possible, right?
Right.
Like, the reason Bitcoin could do what it was doing is because it simultaneously became the form of money to pay for it, right? Like, why
They had
couldn't
no choice.
Bitcoin?
Yeah, they had no choice.
Yeah,
It's like
like
this.
before, people are like, we need a trusted third party to do this because no one can pay for it. And Bitcoin says, wait a minute, if we ourselves are the form of money that we're agreeing on, we can agree who has it, and we don't need an owner to serve that role. So it came in and it did something that people thought was theoretically impossible. And then you look back and you're like it's a genius move. And you can understand why it was difficult for people to see. But once you understand it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. And it just pushes things forward. I think Sato's the same way. We wanted to talk today about actually something really practical, which is like, fundamentally, what is that shift? I think
Mhm.
we were talking
Do
about
you do you think
Bitcoin
that do you
as
think that do you think that to understand Saito, you would have to first understand Bitcoin, or do you think you could go from not understanding Bitcoin at all to figuring out exactly what Sato's doing?
I have no idea.
Okay, okay.
I mean, you'd have to tell me.
Right,
We,
right.
thinking about the problem in the very beginning, we didn't think about it in the way we try to explain it, because we're trying to find easier ways to make it understandable for people.
Mhm.
And that means kind of thinking about, well, more abstractly, what is this? And I think
Right.
Richard and I have both developed a richer understanding. Like, at the beginning, I didn't think about it in terms of market failures.
Mm.
The starting intuition was that we've got a machine that's pushing money in circles, and
Mm.
all of the money is going to miners. So can't we can't we push it in circles and pay the people running servers? So it was kind of, it started as a technical problem.
Hmm.
And then,
Interesting.
and then a lot of walking. And then, you know, one of the problems is you're often thinking in circles because like the issue there is how do you pay someone for something that's not mining and that's not staking? Because anyone can show up and say they've done it. It's a distributed system. How do I know you've really done the work?
Are you a coder too?
Yeah. We're
You
both
are. Obviously,
code.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, because I was gonna say, I mean, I don't really understand coding, so a lot of this is like, holy shit, trying to figure out, you know.
I
But
think
I
you
never
gotta,
really,
I think you gotta code because like coming up with it, the first thing we did is you code a toy version of it to see if it works, right? Like, because we stumble onto something, we're like, actually, we think this approach works. You got to code it, you got to build it, because if maybe you're going to find out it's impossible when you try to implement.
okay. So
But
I'm just trying to help people like me who have no idea, try to see, what exactly is going on here.
hmm.
How did they build it? Whatever.
Well, let's
Um,
talk about what it is. I mean, one of the things
okay,
we
let's go
talked
ahead.
about is the idea of approaching crypto as taxation, you know? Because a lot of people, they think, oh, it's technical. And so they don't think actually what we're really trying to do is we're trying to tax attackers.
Hmm.
And I think part of the problem is that the really technical people, like if you go to Vitalik or Zuku, the problem in these networks is that you can't identify who the attacker is and who the honest party is. And they're not wrong.
Right.
Like if you picked any node in the network, you can't say this guy's honest and this guy's dishonest.
Hmm.
And like if someone produces a block and someone else produces a block 30 seconds later, like are they dishonest or are they just on a slower network connection? Or
Hmm.
maybe they had a hiccup or something and they just rejoined the network. Like you don't know.
Hmm. So it's a whole different way to distinguish who's the attacker,
Well,
kind of.
I think those kind of statements are one reason that POS isn't really making a lot of headway on the
Okay,
fundamentals,
okay.
because
It's not
like,
enough. It's not deep enough.
well, if you look at Bitcoin, you can see Bitcoin actually does have a way to tax attackers. And people don't think about it this way. But the way Bitcoin taxes attackers is it says the money is coming from the longest chain. So if you mine on that longest chain, you're an honest node because you're building the chain and you're more likely to get paid. Because if you build on the head of the chain, your mining is more likely to turn into money. And Bitcoin says, but attackers don't build on the tip of the longest chain. They're trying to fork. And so attackers have to do more work than the honest network. It's more expensive for them. So to
Okay.
produce the same length of the blockchain to get the longest chain,
Hmm.
it costs attackers more.
Okay.
And this is a tax, right? Like it's not a tax on any individual node. It's an incentive structure that taxes anyone who does something that an honest node might do, but that
Hmm.
attackers have to do.
Okay.
And that's why economically, if you have a tax on this bad behavior, you've got this Nash equilibrium economic network where everyone kind of becomes honest. And
Hmm.
you may not be able to look at some node and say, okay, this node's honest, this node's an attacker. But in that kind of system, you don't need to, because as you don't like, it doesn't matter if you punish one or two honest nodes that are a little bit slow or that behave for better or worse like attackers. Because if you punish them and you punish attackers, all you're left with are honest nodes. And that's what you
Hmm.
need.
Hmm.
So,
That makes sense.
so like that's the Bitcoin tax. The problem is that tax falls apart at 50%, right? Like,
Mhm.
so we've got this wonderful system. It's taxing attackers. It's promoting honesty. Um, it's doing it in an open system. The problem is as soon as you get 50% of hash, that tax fails. It just goes away. It collapses. And I think this is one of the reasons that people like Vitalik and Zuku fall into this trap, right? Because they assume that like the real problem is, how do you have a tax that applies all the time? And they think the problem is, well, we can't fix that tax issue. And we don't know who's honest and who isn't. So we just have to develop these really technical systems that don't address the fundamentals.
For the time being, or do you think that they plan on fixing it, or they just, that's it?
I think
Just
they'll
patch it up?
incorporate routing work within about 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
I think Saito will be misunderstood and non-understood, and then eventually people will go, of course, just take some of the money and we need to give it to the routing network. That's a tax.
How did you come up with that?
I think that's, conceptualizing it as a tax is a way of explaining it. It's not how we came up with it. We came up with it by trying to figure out how we can pay these computers. Like
Okay.
how do you, if you've got an open network, you don't know who's in it. And you can't do the POS thing of saying, oh, we're only going to permit these computers to enter because you've added closure. That, like a lot of proof of stake people, they do this. They add the closure and then they say, look, we're the same as Bitcoin. And it's like, no, if an attacker gets control of the majority of those computers inside your little closed loop, they can stop anyone from coming in. Like it's a massive attack vector because honestly, like who attacks financial systems? People think they're defending against a bank robber. And it's like, look, you're defending against the political corruption of the Fed. You've got a money system. There's so much money at stake that these centralizing forces, like, of course, your system is people are going to try to own that. And it's going to get politically corrupted and degraded and economically corrupted.
It's interesting how like the macro, like Saito is actually like, it's the macro, right? Or no, it's the micro. And then it's kind of like,
So,
I don't know, it's like society is kind of mimics the way it works,
yeah, I mean, it's the thing with voting systems, right? Like if you've got that Nakamoto tax, if that's what you're building on, you've got a majoritarian attack. And if you've got a majoritarian attack, you've got a democratic system. If you've got a democratic system, you're like, that's the Fed. You've got people voting and they're voting with money for more money, but they're voting. And I think this is one reason people have trouble with it, because they can see that Bitcoin breaks here, but they assume that that's still okay. And the invention is something else. And it's like, no, the invention is we've gotten to the 50% point. We've got this economic tax. And the fact that it breaks at 50% is the problem, right? Like, don't look at the fact that it breaks and say, well, the invention has to be something else. Get rid of the fact that it breaks at 50%. And that's what Saito does. And that's what no other blockchain does. And that's why we're building it, because it's not like, oh, look at this other network. It's 97%, but there's this 3% difference and ours is slightly more efficient. It's nobody else is doing this.
Do you think you generally think more into the future than other creators of blockchains?
I think we worry about different problems. People, the proof of stake people, they worry about things like finality. Like if I make a transaction, will it be rolled back? We're worried more about, well, like, is the network going to turn into Google? And you can see from the attack vectors people worry about. We're really religious about openness. We don't want to add closure to the system. So we don't want anything that decides who gets to vote or decides who gets to spend money. And proof of stake people,
like Zuckerberg.
Yeah, it's a perfect example, right? Like, and this is one of the fundamental things, because we're like, I've got graduate training in economics and stuff. It's the economics that corrupt the systems people are trying to fix, right? Like like Google's don't be evil. The problem is that's not an economically enforceable protocol.
Right.
That's kind of like what a proof of stake person would design, like Axiom 1, if honest nodes are not evil. Axiom 2, as long as 51% of nodes are not evil, we've designed a system. And it's like, well, the only people that are left functionally if the only people that survive in the free market are dishonest people, you're not going to have 51% of your participants honest over time. And that's like, it is a different focus. I think for proof of stake people, they may say, oh, well, this isn't practical because we're building we're building mechanisms that make transactions. And we don't think we are. We think we're building open, self-sustainable data networks that don't have owners. And that doing that requires the network to be money. And so kind of, the finality of money is a second order consideration as long as we can preserve the openness of the network.
Okay, and when you say openness, you mean that nobody has authority over someone else?
I mean, everyone gets treated equally.
Okay.
So it's non-excludable. No one can stop you from coming in. But
Okay.
how are we treating people equally? Well, one, users, like your transaction is as good as mine. If I might pay a higher fee for privilege, but if you pay a higher fee, you get the same treatment on the network. So that's the user perspective. A lot of people, when they look at crypto networks, that's what they care about. And so they're like, oh, I'm really worried about censorship, and I'm worried about this. And it's kind of weird because the same people don't have a problem with, if you pay a higher fee, you get better treatment. But it's not just the users. People focus on the users. Like if you're worried about finality, that means you're worried about users. But there's another side to it, right? Like you have to worry about the openness of the network to the people in the network too. Because, a lot of these networks, a lot of the design problems that they make causes, you can see centralization in the number of providers. Or we get things like Infura, and we get things like MetaMask, and these things start growing that, some kind of miners or stakers start to bully other miners and stakers. And that's a form of inegalitarian, unequal access, right? Like if you can get 51%, or a group of people can get 51%, you can bully the smaller miners and the smaller stakers. And so what do you get as an outcome if you have a market where the top 51% can always be richer than the bottom 49%? Like what happens over time? Like you're just gradually going to be shedding the smallest and weakest player. And you're gradually, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30 years. Like this is the US banking system. It just gradually kind of turns into this thing that that gets corrupted for profit. Yeah. So openness, I mean, it's not just about users being able to access the network. It's about anyone can join, because that's also on the network. Like, how do you fight corruption? Well, one thing you do is you replace the people that are corrupt with other people. So if one miner refuses to do things, well, you send your transactions to somebody else. That's how Saito works. If anyone behaves against users, it's very easy for users to swap in another network provider, and that network provider is now more profitable. With Bitcoin proof of stake, it's a lot harder, right? Because like if you send your transactions to someone else and they're this small little tiny player, a bigger miner can just steal that money out of their pocket, and the person that's supposed to be fighting them is now bankrupt. We can see this in BSV, for instance, where you've got this big miner that the entire network is reliant on, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to resurrect the Satoshi coins and we're just going to eat them. And people, you can't do anything with that because you can't get rid of this guy. And if you try, they're going to bankrupt anyone who tries to step in. So
that's really interesting, man. That's what I'm saying. Like, I was so interested in what you're saying, because in the crypto, nobody ever talks about anything like this, like in economics.
Well, they think of it's because they think it's a technical invention, right? They think, oh my God, this guy, Satoshi, he invented digital money. And it's like, no, there were so many kinds of digital money before Satoshi came along. The problem is they all had these trusted third parties. Like and mostly it's because you've got this digital money, and then it needs to map to some kind of real world money. Right. Because you need that trusted third party in the middle to decide, like, well, what's the legitimate money and what's the illegitimate money, or issue it or handle the conversion. And with
debit cards and stuff like that.
Yeah, like PayPal,
Yeah, PayPal, exactly.
And like, there's this wonderful bit that nobody reads in the Bitcoin white paper where Satoshi says, look, The problem actually is that when you have these financial institutions like banks, they get forced to mediate, which is really interesting because he doesn't say why, but why? Because it's obvious. Like if you're a trusted third party, you get regulated. And how do you stop that? You have an open network where if someone gets regulated, the network just replaces them. So openness is one of the values of is it lets you replace people, and it doesn't let these people establish themselves in these trusted positions where they can be turned against you by political regulation or by their own economic profit seeking desires, because like that's Google.
Okay.
Don't be
And what
evil.
makes you
Look how
able to
quickly that
replace?
comes.
What makes the network able to tell if the person needs to be replaced? How do they tell?
You can't.
No, I mean, you said that in Saito that the person who had power, if he was being
Oh,
bullying others, he could be replaced.
well, sure. Like in Saito, what's bullying someone else? If you're bullying someone else, you're harming them for profit. So
Okay.
you can have something like a Sybil node, someone who inserts a node into the network. You could do that to make some money, right?
Okay.
Like Saito pays for routing. So if you can stick a node in between, if I can stick a node between you and the people sending you money, I make money. Now, if I can lock it in, I'm on easy street. But the openness of the network means I can't do that, because you can always go around me and say, look, guys, why are you sending half of the profits to David? Right? Like it hurts you and it hurts me. And so the economics and the openness allow us to route around that. That can happen in a lot of situations, like a block producer censors. Well, if a block producer is censoring, or a block producer is behaving in a way that's harming users or harming relay nodes, like maybe they're really holding back or they're attacking, you send your transactions to someone else. So you can't really do that in Bitcoin, right? Because if someone has 50% of the hashing power, well, you can send your transactions to someone else and they can mine the blocks. And then the bigger miner takes those transactions, moves them into their own blocks, mines the longest chain, and it's the big miner that makes all of the profit.
Wow.
Like that's what the 50% attack is. It's technically, we've got systems where we're voting on money, right? And whoever has the most votes gets all of the money. So the thing that breaks at the 51% point is the principle of equal treatment in the network for the provision of work. Like for that 51%, everyone gets paid equally for the amount of work they do. And so you can swap in new people, and like I can join from home. And even if I've only got 0.01% of hash, I'll make 0.01% of the money.
Right.
Because there's 51%, that big consortium can say, well, let's remove the money from his block and just give it to ourselves. And all of a sudden, like, and that's incentivized. So
That's very interesting. And so you think this would honestly be like, let's say a government wanted to implement some type of cryptocurrency blockchain, to help them. I don't know. Well, you tell me what it would help them with exactly. I mean, I'm not an expert on, what it would do
sure,
for
you mean
the,
like why would
I don't know. You
why
know how
would we worry about, you
like
mean
I
what's the
remember,
problem if we don't have openness? Is that what you're asking?
no, I was saying like, I kind of went off topic, but I was saying like, okay, let's say a government was interested and they said, hey David, Saito sounds very interesting and it could maybe help our economy or our whatever, our city, I don't know. How would you go about, like, what would that help, if you could explain that?
I don't really know what you're asking.
Like,
Like, there's no
I
real.
remember VeChain was being kind of implemented in, I don't remember if it was Indonesia or something like that, so to help the supply chain crisis, because they could like, it would help with verify, like, let's say you sent something from China, a manufacturing company sent something from China, they would be able to track it all the way to where it went, to be able to figure out if it was contaminated with COVID and stuff like that. So that's what VeChain did. I was wondering, like, if Saito was to be implemented on a large scale, how would it look? Is that is there any?
It looks like a
other-
blockchain. In Bitcoin, it's the miners that make all of the money, right?
Okay.
So we've got massive mining. You can go to the mountains in Sichuan. You can go to, I think, Kazakhstan. They've got, and they're massive, massive deployments of mining and hashing equipment.
Mhm.
Really impressive. And meanwhile, the network's like, oh, we're relying on John to volunteer to provide a node on a Raspberry Pi. And people are like, where is the scaling? We can't scale this network. And it's like, it's not difficult to see why. Step one, take all of the money that you're burning and instead use it to pay for the electricity that's running the servers.
See,
Burn
yeah,
the money that way, and you'll get a more scalable network.
I get what you're saying. So Saito it never has to pay for itself because the fees are constantly paying for the network to run.
Well, Saito, right? If
Yeah, that's what I'm
we're
saying.
thinking about the scaling problems, like why is Bitcoin like that? Bitcoin's like that because they can't pay for routing. Because
Right.
like as soon as they say, oh, we're going to pay more for bandwidth, it's like I can connect 3 computers in my basement, have them send data in circles, and they show up and they say, okay, give me 2% of the block reward. And all of a sudden you have a network with no security. And like, it's just a bunch of people fighting for free money. So, one of the things you need to do is you need to have information that you can use to create this tax. And that's what mining is. It's information. You can objectively observe it in a distributed system. And because you can objectively observe it, you can add this objective tax.
I never got that. That makes sense.
People don't think about it this way because they don't think of it as a tax, right? Like they think of it as a problem with tokens. Like they're
right.
And so when they look at Bitcoin, they don't even see the economic sides. They say, oh, this is an improvement on distributed consensus from the 1980s.
Oh, okay. So they think that all the mining rigs are just so the transactions could go through faster. In reality, it's so the network can work.
Well, I mean, people will say things like this because they're not thinking it through. Like, how does a mining rig make the transactions go faster? Exactly. And they'll think and they'll go, oh, well, it's because miners will pay for the equipment to do this. It's like, well, actually, will they? And if you look into it, you'll find actually they don't want to and they're not going to. The BTC people understand that. The BCH and BSV people don't. But
so you're saying that Saito doesn't really need rigs; it only needs a computer to be able to make. To go ahead, you finish it. You finish it. I don't want to mix it up.
I'll put it this way: one of the things the routing SIGs give us is it gives us an objective source of truth. Doesn't matter, the system's open. We still have objective truth about something. What is it? Who collected the money? And who helped them collect the money?
Okay.
Because we can measure that, we can turn it into a tax. And the way we turn it into a tax is we say, you got to use this to make blocks. Bitcoin it collects the money, it uses the money to make blocks. Saito does the same thing. Difference is, if you're making blocks and you look and you're deeper in the network, those fees are less useful. It's kind of like if you're an attacker, you get less money from these blocks when you're collecting the money to make work. And the second thing we do is we use that information to give a tax on the payments so that when the block is produced, we have to do this hashing to find out who gets paid, and you're less likely to get paid if you're the block producer. So proof of work, proof of stake, they've got the classic Bitcoin tax of that longest chain, but that tax stops at the 50% mark. With Saito, we still have that tax, but we add this extra one because we charge attackers more money to make blocks, and we pay them less for that work. And that gets our cost of attack well above 100%. And it's kind of hard to see exactly why it happens, but the fundamental observation is that if you're an attacker, what it does is it makes it expensive to put money that other people who aren't you, are paying into your blocks, because you're
That makes
disadvantaged relative to at least one other person in the network on all of those transactions. It's a bit of a, it's a really weird and new and interesting tax, and it's very difficult and counterintuitive, but it's also very simple and very elegant, right? Like, if you're earlier in the routing path, it's easier and cheaper for you to make blocks. And when you make them, you're going to get more money. So like, if you're deeper in the network,
why is that? Why is that again? Why is it the earlier that you are, it's cheaper?
it's kind of like, picture the fee in Bitcoin, the fee pays for the hash, right? And whoever makes a block, they get the money. So they get 100% of the fee to buy hash. With Saito, we're using the fee directly to drive work. So the deeper a transaction goes, like if I'm a user and I give you a transaction, I sign it to you, you get a lot of help making a block from that transaction.
Okay.
But if you send it to someone else, that transaction is half as useful to them as it is to you. Can we